Thank you so much, Heather, and welcome to the Canine Decoded Show. I'm super excited having you here today. And I think it's going to be a very interesting topic for a lot of my audiences. I haven't talked too much about detection in dogs and in particular biodetection. So for those who don't know you yet, and I hope after this podcast, everyone will know you. Why don't you give a super brief introduction who you are and obviously your work, what your company is all about, and then we'll dive more into the details of it.
Great. So I'm Heather Junqueira, and I am the owner of Canine. And I got started with the biological detection dogs several years ago with, I lost my father to cancer. And it was a late diagnosis.
Mm.
And I was like, well, there has to be a better way. And so I started looking at different diagnostic methods for cancer. And I came across an article done by the Pine Street Institute in California, where they had used dogs to detect lung cancer in breath condensate. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. So I reached out to them. One thing led to another. They asked if I would be interested in duplicating their research. And so I started to do that, started working on that. We did a study with breath condensate. We also did a study with blood serum to see if dogs could differentiate between healthy controls and patients with lung cancer.
Mm.
So that was so the basis where we started was cancer detection, and there are a lot of complications to using dogs to screen for cancer, which we figured out as the project progressed. One of the biggest issues with that is, yes, the dogs can detect cancer. They can detect it in breath condensate. You can train them to be specific to certain types of cancer. Although it is hard to keep them specific because dogs like to generalize. So that is a challenge. And the other challenge is that there's not a rapid diagnostic to verify the dog's results. So this is kind of where I started to move away from the cancer detection, because if you have a dog saying, okay, we're detecting, the presence of cancer in this patient that might have breast cancer, but a mammogram can't pick that up, then that's not really doing the patient any good because an oncologist won't see him.
Right.
So as COVID came along, I had a physician reach out and say, hey, could you train dogs on a virus? And this was a couple months before the lockdowns. And so I had never even heard of COVID. And I was like, sure, let me try. We could set up a study. So I was like, what's the name of the virus? So I started calling around to biorepositories looking for COVID samples, nasopharynx swabs. And I got a couple of phone calls from some government agencies like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you looking for these samples of this virus? So I went into
Do you think they thought you were somehow a threat, or you're like kind of trying to do something that is not?
I definitely put up red flags. I received a phone call from a veterinarian from the Department of Defense. And when he introduced himself, like my heart dropped. And he's like, don't worry, you're not in trouble. This is a recorded line. We just have some questions for you. I was like, okay. And so I love talking about the dogs and what I do with them. So I kept this poor guy on the phone for like an hour. So I was telling him all the stuff like I'd done in the past, and how the dogs can detect different odors and what I was trying to do with COVID. And coincidentally, the next day, some samples became available from a biorepository. So
No.
that's how I got the start with training the dogs to see if they could detect COVID. They were very successful at it. And that was a really interesting to see, because we didn't know if they could pick up on a virus.
Mhm.
And so then because cancer is very different than that. So they were able to pick up on the virus. And the nice thing with COVID is they were able to pick it up in multiple different mediums. Like we started out with nasal pharynx swabs. We then tested them on breath condensate, which they were able to indicate on. Other organizations trained dogs on sweat, and they were able to indicate on that. So the odor's pretty strong with COVID. And when we started testing them on live individuals, that was such an aha moment for the dogs. Like I have a video of this one little dog. She was so cute. It was actually a boy. He was so cute because when he's like walking down the sidewalk sniffing. They were actually family members of mine who got to be the guinea pigs. I found out that my brother had COVID. So I was like, I'm coming up to your house and I'm bringing a dog and you go out on the porch. And at this point, everybody's still like, we're having like kind of, protective gear. And I've got like a really long leash on the dog. And then I had a couple people like standing really far apart from him. And as the dog's like walking down and gets close to him, you could see that light bulb go on in the dog. And the dog, like, he like sat so fast and turned around and looked at me like, I failed it. And he was so happy. It was the cutest moment ever. And
Was that
yeah,
the first time the dog had detected it on the live person after training?
yes. Yes, it was the first time, yeah, on a live person. And then the dog moved on from my brother to my niece, who was not symptomatic at all, didn't think she had COVID, and boom, sat on her. And yeah, she ended up having COVID as well.
Oh, wow.
So,
And they didn't
yeah,
know at this moment
no,
yet.
they didn't know at that moment yet.
And you just had
So,
them lined up to play around as like guinea pigs
yes,
whenever it works
it's
and
getting
get detected.
exactly. Yes,
Good for
exactly.
the dogs, though.
Yeah, good for the dogs. I'm like, stand 8 feet apart and let me screen you. So, they were my first guinea pigs in that, little COVID experiment. And, yeah, it was great for the dog. He was so excited.
So when you say the smell or the detection, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it, is very strong with COVID. Can you explain what that strong means? Because obviously it's not
Yes.
the actual smell.
Right.
Like,
Right. So the dogs are able to pick it up so easily
mm,
and from a pretty significant distance. We had one dog, we were doing, an event in New York City with Florida International University. And we had gone up to Bark Box up there and we had taken 5 dogs up and we're screening their employees. It was their first big day back to work. Well, that evening we had gone out to eat and I had one of the dogs with me. Her name was Noelle. And we're sitting like on a street corner. Like there's all the outdoor seating. At that time, everything you kind of had to sit outside. So we were sitting outside and an SUV pulled up and they opened the doors. And so it was probably about 30 feet away from us, probably like 20 to 30 feet. They opened the door. Noelle went from laying down like asleep under the table. She popped up and started to like beeline towards the SUV.
mm.
And as a woman got out, she just like planted that sit like right next to the woman. And then it became a whole discussion and, with the woman like, okay, what's your dog doing? And I explained. And the woman went on to tell us that she had gotten over COVID, but the dog was still indicating,
Oh, okay.
on her. So it's a strong odor that it would pick up in the air and move that many feet, to
Yeah.
elicit that response from the
Yeah.
dog. The face mask that we have from when COVID first started, the dogs are still indicating on. So we're talking
Mm.
several years of storage, and these masks, the odor tends to stay on it, which is really
Oh,
incredible. So
okay.
so it's
Yeah.
fascinating. So it's quite a strong odor. So from COVID, we've moved on now to looking at what other types of pathogens dogs can detect. So I'm working on a study with tuberculosis,
Mhm.
which it's not really a problem here in the US, but it is a really large problem overseas. So we're working on a study in South Africa with the Desmond Tutu Foundation and seeing if dogs are able to pick up the odor of tuberculosis. And we're
Yeah.
looking at using a breath condensate, a face mask, but we're also going to look at hand odor because there's some interesting theories going around that the odor is actually just kind of surrounds your body. It's like your body has kind of a biome of odor coming off of it. You're constantly shedding skin cells. And so you constantly have this odor about you.
Hmm.
And so we're looking to see if dogs can pick up the tuberculosis on hand odor as well as on breath.
Interesting. Okay. What is the rate of tuberculosis in Africa, South Africa, where you're
So
off?
I don't know the exact rates right now. I know that with some of the research that's been done as diagnostics have gotten better, they're finding organisms in everyone they're testing.
Hmm.
So they don't understand, there's not a correlation between the amount of organisms and the tuberculosis becoming active. So one of the big questions is, why do some people carry around tuberculosis their entire lives and never become, actively ill with it, where other people can have fewer organisms but become ill with the disease?
Mhm.
So we're trying to see if dogs can identify the active individuals so we could help with screening people out to get them into treatment.
Got it.
Those are the goals of that,
Yeah.
that study. But I'll have to get you the exact rates. It's incredibly high. And one of the issues we're seeing with tuberculosis is that there's are becoming antibiotic resistant strains.
Hmm.
There's a lot of them in Russia. There's a lot in Ukraine. So, Eastern Europe is dealing with a lot of multi-drug resistant TB, which is really scary, and it's quite a problem.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's prompted us to start looking at,
Yeah.
using the dogs to screen large numbers of people.
And why tuberculosis? So it's by now 7 years ago, I
Hmm.
volunteered in a tuberculosis lab in
Hmm.
Thailand, and we were screening migrants from
Hmm.
Myanmar, and with
Yeah.
a high rate of tuberculosis. And I was helping the lab, just in the procedures, and it was a very tedious, complicated process. Lots of manually, processing the samples that you would
Hmm.
get and looking through the microscope and really counting there and seeing what you see. And for me, my untrained eye didn't see as much, right? So I remember it being very tedious. It's been 7 years, so I don't know what the actual normal diagnostic looks like, but what is the benefit or what is the advantage if you have actually dogs that can
So the
detect?
advantage is being able to screen large numbers of people rapidly.
Hmm.
So that's the biggest problem, is getting people in. One, the diagnostic tools aren't great yet. They're working on getting better diagnostics. So that is one of the biggest problems. And it's the time it takes. Like you're saying, looking under a microscope, and that's very labor intensive. So there's a lot of people researching different ways to diagnose tuberculosis. So where the dogs come into play is being able to screen out individuals that we feel like they're active, and then get those individuals in for testing first. Yeah. So say if you were going to go through a school and screen the kids in the school, then you can say, okay, like these kids need to it's almost like triage. They need to move to the front of the line to be tested,
Hmm.
and then you can move on with testing the other kids. So that's, those
Yeah.
are the goals with that.
Yeah. And what kind of dogs are you working with mostly?
So mostly beagles. They,
Yeah.
they're so cute and mischievous, and they have amazing noses. Though they are just so keen to work
Yeah.
and to. It's a big game for them.
Mm. And do you
So
breed them? Do you breed them yourself?
So I do. I also get beagles from shelters occasionally. Like I have a couple of the different animal services, in my area. When they get beagles come in that for some reason they can't adopt out, they'll generally call me and be like, "Hey, do you want to come test this dog?" But it's hard to get them out of rescue, because most of the time when they do go into rescue, because they're so cute, people want to adopt them for family pets.
Mhm.
And most of the rescues prefer the dogs to go into their forever home and be a pet as opposed to being a working dog.
Right.
So that kind of forced me into breeding. So
Okay.
that's where we ended up. But we have good lines that we're working with now. We lean towards the hunting lines, although do have a couple show dogs occasionally that they get in there. I do there are a couple show breeders that will get dogs that are too hyper for the show ring. And those dogs generally make amazing detection dogs. And so I've tapped into that resource as well. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, because by the time they realize they're not making it as show dogs, they might be 1 or 2 years old, which is perfect for me to
Yeah.
start training. So, I do have some great breeders that I work with that show their dogs, but when they get ones that are just too much, they're like, "Hey, we got a dog for you." So that's good.
So other than the cuteness, which is obviously a big factor, is there anything else that makes you prefer working with beagles versus other dogs
Yes.
that can detect?
Yeah, they definitely they're better at the scent detection work overall. They have more olfactory nerves. Say bloodhounds have the most, then bassets, then beagles. I tried a bloodhound once. It was crazy. It was like a hurricane in my training room. He was so big and clumsy, and they're a lot to feed, to take care of, to maintain. Then I tried basset hounds. I have two bassets, Teddy and Sunshine. They're adorable. They're so lazy. They will come in and they can do the work. Like they'll sniff the canisters. They're like, oh, that was fun for like a minute. And then they just like lay down or roll over, rub my belly. Yeah, they don't have a work ethic. But the beagle is perfect. Like the beagle, they come into the training room. They're so excited, to do the work. I've tried a couple labs and shepherds, and now I have some English Springer Spaniels. They're just not the same. Like the Beagles are just so consistent and so eager to do it that
Yeah.
they're really my breed of preference. And they're small. They're easy to transport and they're not intimidating, which is a huge factor when you're actually screening on live individuals for different pathogens. You want people to feel comfortable to get close to the dog. And if you're using a dog that's a larger dog, that might incite fear in people. So that's the
True.
other reason we like the
Especially when
beagles.
you also screen kids, right, in school.
Right.
This one, yeah.
Exactly.
And they
Yeah.
can be knocked over and then they, I don't know,
Yeah.
all
So
kinds of
that's,
issues.
yeah, you just avoid a lot. Like I've never had an aggressive beagle, it's just,
Yeah.
you avoid a lot of issues
Yeah.
with using the smaller
And you
dogs.
can only focus then on the actual training. So
Right.
tell me how a training for a beagle looks like. How does
So
it look like?
well, I can start, like, I'll get dogs in at a year and I'll start them, but when I breed them, I usually start them at about 8 to 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we introduce them to the training room. So we have scent stations along the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And we use a compound called UDC. It's a universal detection compound. So it's not found in the environment, so you won't get false positives off of that. So we use that along with a treat and train. So we'll put the treat and train in the middle, and I'll put two canisters, one on each side, and I'll put UDC in one, the other one's blank. And as soon as the puppy sticks its nose in the canister with the UDC, I click the button and the machine gives them a treat. It doesn't take them long to figure out, okay, I stick my nose in here, I get a treat. And then they'll try the other side and realize they don't get one.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they finally get consistent with that, we start just moving the canisters.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to realize, wait, it's not the location, it's the odor.
Mm-hmm.
And from then, they get it. Then they know that's their game. And so we imprint when they're little on UDC, like around 8 to 10 weeks. Then we don't train them all the time at that age. Then they'll go out and just do puppy stuff. We do a lot of socialization and, a lot of different things with them. And then they might do scent training, once every 2 weeks, when they're little. As they reach 6 months, then we start increasing the amount of scent training they do.
Got it. Okay. And as you but in your litter, the dogs that you breed, what
Mhm.
is the success rate? How many do you get all the way through?
So most of them, I mean, we usually are around 75 to 80% success rate,
Mhm.
depending on the mom and dad. I had one litter, the whole litter failed. And it was strange because the mom and dad, all the previous litters were incredibly successful. And we did everything the same, but the dad, the sire, well, the dad and mom both were starting to get a little bit older.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that, affected it, but this one particular litter, they were just really shy. And so they didn't fail because of the scent work. They failed because of their socialization. They were, we call it too soft.
Mhm.
So we ended up having to adopt that entire litter out. It was really, really disappointing there.
Yeah.
But, and that was the last litter from their mom. And yeah, she had had, two really successful litters before that. So it was kind of shocking. So I haven't quite figured that one out, but generally, we're around, 80% success rate, for the litters.
And what do you, in terms of just the detection, or
Mhm.
maybe all of it, what do you need to see for I'm assuming you are the one who says fail or not.
Right. So we have, they're like, we have different evaluation tests that the
Mhm.
dogs do. And, one of the, most of the time a dog fails, it's because they're too shy. Yeah,
Mm.
so some of that, can be maybe they weren't socialized enough, but most of the time, because we're pretty much, we start them instantly. With ours, I tend to think when they're too soft, it's genetics. So
Mhm.
that's when we start looking at, changing it, maybe not breeding those same parents or one particular, part of that pair. But
Yeah.
the most of the reasons they fail is just they're not brave enough and they just
Okay.
some of those dogs just want to be pets. I mean, rarely do I get a beagle that doesn't want to do the scent work.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be one or two that's just kind of too spacey. They come in, they're just distracted, and don't want to focus. But most of the time, it's just because they're timid, and so that doesn't work well for a detection dog.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember you telling me that you also, like you just said, transporting, you fly with them, you
Hmm.
ship them everywhere, and
Yeah,
you have to endure a lot of environmental input and yet stay
right.
still.
Exactly. Like I send a lot of dogs to Israel. And yeah, those dogs, I mean, they're going into a very different, environment. They're working on cancer detection for a company called Spotted Early.
Hmm.
And so I've sent, I think they have 11 dogs now for me, but that's a long trip. So you have to have a really environmentally sound dog to completely change environments, change everything, and then be able to turn around and start working,
Yeah.
consistently again. So,
Yeah. And if you put a dog to work and they're supposed to detect cancer or even COVID,
mhm.
maybe during the height of COVID,
Yeah.
the chances of sniffing out COVID or detecting is probably really high. But, if you have maybe suspected patients, it's not that every single patient is a hit, right? So how do
Right.
is it something that is coming just with the genetics or with the
Mhm.
temperament of the dog, or do you have some influence with the training? How do you keep them motivated?
We have to influence with the training because you'll have what's called extinction behavior.
Hmm.
So if you have a dog that's constantly working and never finding a positive, they're going to quit working.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, there's a couple ways to handle that. Like if most of our dogs now, like the ones, especially like the ones that go to Israel and a lot of stuff I do, they're working in laboratory settings. So it's really easy to add positive samples in for them, to
Hmm.
make sure they're getting a positive. But one thing we also do is we run a lot of runs on blank samples where there are no positives out. So when they're in a real working situation and they're not getting any positives, they learn not to be frustrated. So we do that, where we run it. They're like, okay, nothing here, nothing here. Then boom, then there's something there. And it generally kind of builds excitement too. If they do a couple runs and they didn't get anything, they're like waiting, okay, wait, there's got to be one coming up, so it
Yeah.
builds
Yeah.
excitement. The other thing we do is an intermittent reward system.
Hmm.
So we don't always reward the dog for getting the sample correct. And I
Got
know
it.
that sounds really strange. And I heard the best explanation I've ever heard of this came from Nathan Hall from Texas Tech. I was listening to him speak, and he compared it to when you go to a vending machine and you put money in for a Coke and you don't get your Coke, like your response is angry. Like you might hit the machine, you might shake the machine, like you're mad you didn't get it because every time you put money in that you're getting that Coke out or whatever soda you want. But he compared that to someone who goes to a slot machine and
Mhm.
they keep putting money in the slot machine and they don't win, they don't win. They don't get angry, they just keep putting money in. They just keep doing the behavior. And then when they finally get the reward, they're super happy. So it's the same thing with the dogs. If
Yeah.
they know every time they hit a positive, they're getting a reward, then they hit a sample where they feel like it's positive and they don't get a reward, they're angry. So,
Mhm.
they're just they pout sometimes, like they'll look at you, they'll keep looking. I've had dogs like swat the canister before, like it is there. They'll get like mad about it.
Mhm.
So you have to condition them to, they're not always getting that treat. I do it gradually. Like I won't give the treat, but I'll tell them good job, like give a verbal reward and then we
Yeah.
can phase that out. And, so they eventually learn it. I think it's more stress on the handler than it is on the dog to not reward them. it's really hard to do because you're like you feel bad, but
You
it's
feel
worth it.
bad and you feel so happy that your dog detected
Right.
correctly, right? And I have the same,
Exactly.
even in just normal pet dog training,
Hmm.
oftentimes when the dog sometimes lacks a little bit of motivation, you go into an intermittent reward system and you time it like the variance is just right. The dog feels like that's not right. I did do it correctly, I'm pretty sure,
Right.
and I didn't get rewarded. Let me try a little bit harder the next time. And you
Yeah.
keep that up. But if you obviously do it too much, too fast, then they will give up because then that turns
Right.
into the frustration, right? And I was just
Exactly.
gonna ask, and you already said it, even though you omit the reward, so you don't give the reward, do you still kind of let them know that they were right, or is this then
Yeah.
completely,
I do in the beginning
yeah,
until like it's a gradual process of getting them used. Once I know they understand the odor they're finding, then I'll start doing the intermittent reward system. And but I gradually get them into it. So it'll go from like not getting the treat, but they get a good job,
hmm,
and maybe like a little pet, and then gradually just to like nothing. But or maybe they'll just hear the beep, but there's no food there. That really irritates them when that happens. But so we graduate it out, the
got it.
reward.
And the rewards, are you mostly working with food?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
beagles are so food motivated.
Hmm.
You could do the exact same thing for a dog. I have one dog, one of my English Springer Spaniels. He won't let go of a ball, so like he works for the Kong. But he it work. I mean, we do the exact same process. So
Yeah,
with
yeah,
him.
yeah. Um, so other than the motivation, what are some of the biggest challenge that you experience maybe in the training or that you generally see these dogs experience? Like where are the limitations?
So, oh, that's a good question. I think it all always goes back to the social aspect with the dogs.
Mm,
The biggest limitation ends up being timidness, and just that occasionally you get one that just doesn't focus really
mm,
well. Like I have one, it's not a beagle. He's a lab mix that was kind of a rescue situation, but I have him and his brother, and he is one of them's really great and really focuses. The other one, he's only 9 months right now. He's just like he cannot figure out what I'm trying to get him to do. It's like I keep trying to help him, and it's like the dots just aren't connecting there. I'm hoping it's age and he like comes along. He's such a sweet dog, but yeah, the dots just aren't connecting. And sometimes they just don't.
yeah,
You
yeah,
occasionally have dogs that are just like, hey, this is not for me. So we just adopt those dogs out. We look for
yeah,
homes for
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of cute to think though. It's like just maybe not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Like you have some of them that walk in and they're just like, and you can tell pretty much instantly. Like we can
Mm,
tell really young, especially on the scent side, if they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Like, why would I do that? And then it's like, okay, this dog needs to go be a pet somewhere.
yeah. Coming back a little bit to COVID,
Hmm.
is there if you had like now after you training so many knowing
Hmm.
what they can do,
Yeah.
um, COVID versus I don't know, a PCR test, your
Uh-huh.
gut instinct, who do you trust more?
I trust the dog. It's so funny. I actually have, I'm not the only one that trusts the dog more. There's actually a physician in Tampa that works with a lot of pro athletes. He does concierge medicine. And a friend of mine who had gotten two dogs from me, she'll run samples for him. And if he has a positive, he's like, I'm going to lean towards treating that person, even if the PCR is still negative, because it's just the dogs have consistently proven to be more accurate. They're hitting about 3 days before PCR. So the problem is the patient comes in early, PCR is not picking up yet, and the dog picks up, so then that's where the physician has that choice of like, what do I do?
Yeah,
But yeah, I trust the dogs for sure.
you trust the dogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then in terms of like any kind of experience that you had with your dogs that especially maybe again within the period of COVID when you
Mhm.
started with that, what was your vision? Like, what did you think you're going to be doing with your dogs? Like helping, I don't know,
Right.
the government, and what actually did it turn
Happen.
out the way
Yeah.
you wanted
So
to?
I was pretty naive. I had not deployed dogs before. Everything I had done had been in a laboratory setting. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, like, okay, we're going to be screening thousands of people, right? And I was thinking, like, these dogs are going to help so many people. And, they're going to want to screen like kids going into schools and they're going to want to screen people going into concerts. And in reality, people only wanted to protect a small group of people. So there were plenty of jobs with COVID, but it wasn't like, for example, like I did a lot of build outs for concerts. So we weren't screening the people coming into the concerts. We were screening all the construction workers, all the employees, anybody that might have contact with one of the artists.
Mhm.
So we were creating bubbles
Mhm.
around select groups of people as opposed to screening large numbers of people. So that's really, that was the biggest reality check. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. The business model of screening large numbers of people didn't really work out. It's more
Yeah.
about protecting small groups of individuals. So that's, yeah, that was
Yeah.
kind of an eye opener.
Yeah.
But, so we just, adjusted to that and, we went with that. Those were the jobs were.
Yeah, it's a little bit like you said at the beginning, right? The big advantage with dogs being able to detect it faster and more accurate makes it a privilege.
Yeah.
And and unfortunately, we live in a society where privilege means where the most money sits, usually on the
Exactly.
biggest benefits, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, we learned,
Yep.
you learned, you learned a little
I
bit more.
learned I
Yeah,
learned a lesson.
I
Yes, and
learned a lesson
definitely.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what are some of the funniest, most memorable, maybe most the strangest thing that has happened in your line of work with your dogs?
I think the most interesting thing for me, if you had asked me, several years ago, especially before COVID, um, if you had asked me like, would I have gone all the places that I've gone and met all the different people I have met? Um, I wouldn't have believed you if you told me. It's been incredible the amount of people that I've been able to meet because of the dogs.
Yeah.
They've taken me, gosh, like amazing places. Like during COVID, during the lockdown, I went out to Las Vegas and I got to meet like tons of casino like owners and managers and talking to them about the dogs and what they could do. And like I just got back from South Africa, working on the project for tuberculosis. I work with an amazing group of people in Australia, working with people in Israel. So the dogs have, for me, I mean, I think the most amazing thing, I mean, besides them, and they're so much fun to work with. I so
Yeah.
enjoy, especially the moments when they figure out the odor. It's like the best thing in the world. It's
Yeah.
like, yes,
Yeah.
they got it. But outside of that, personally, it's just been all the wonderful people that I've been able to meet, and make contacts with around the world. It's really opened up from being something that I felt like, a little bit alone, like, okay, I'm just kind of doing this over at my corner here to now I have this like huge support network and all these people that are involved, with the canine scent detection. So that's been amazing.
Like the dogs have allowed for a much broader connection between
Yes.
people, right?
Yes, exactly.
They're known to be able to do that. I mean, if you
Yeah.
go, unless you have an aggressive dog,
Yeah.
obviously, if you go down the street with a cute dog, right? That kind of connects people immediately because
Yeah.
they wanna share, I don't know, the
It,
cuteness, the joy and
it
whatnot.
really, it really does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many amazing things. Like I have a group of dogs right now that, a group of English Springer Spaniels that, they're not making it as detection dogs. I think they're too much along the show lines, but, trying to find like an organization I can put them with because they are amazing dogs. Like they are so empathetic. They are so sweet and kind and, they're kind of like the Velcro dog, but, we're so focused on scent detection. I don't really have the time to train them, for like PTSD or, some of the therapy work they would be so good at. So,
Yeah.
that's, you always kind of look at that, like trying to find the best job for the dog, the different dogs. But
Yeah.
I love taking these dogs out because people light up when they see them just because they are so friendly and so
Yeah.
cute that I just see people's demeanors change, like when they interact with the dogs, which is it's really fascinating, how a dog can change someone that quickly.
Yeah. I think there have been plenty of research anyways now that the interaction with the dog, the
Mhm.
petting, releases a lot of good stuff in your brain, not just
Yeah.
in you as humans, but also in the dog. So it's truly
Yes.
kind of like the interaction.
Yeah.
Um, I just got reminded of something that you said at the beginning. So because you just mentioned
Mhm.
PTSD, um, you said something that it's hard sometimes to keep them specific for specific diseases because they
Hmm.
tend to generalize.
Right.
What does that mean in that
Yeah.
detection?
So in the detection world, like, so dogs, generalization can be your friend or it can be your enemy. Like, they'll start to pick up odors that smell similar. So I'll use cancer as an example. So if you have a dog that's trained on breath condensate from breast cancer patients, and then you run them on unknown samples, and there's a lung cancer sample in there, which smells similar. There's some similar compounds to it, but it's not the same. If they're rewarded, it can only take one time. If they're rewarded for that other sample, then you've got an issue where, okay, now they're starting to generalize. So I've seen dogs go from specific to breast cancer to hitting on any type of cancer because of generalization. I did one study with trying to look at canine cancers, and I don't know. I probably need to revisit it and duplicate it again to look closer at why we had the issues we had. But the dogs, we were going to do just all types of cancers that could affect canines. So I got samples from Cornell, and we used oral swabs, and we were looking at mast cell, and like I think we chose like 4 types of cancer. And we intentionally wanted the dogs to generalize across the cancer odor. But what ended up happening, they generalized across all disease. So when we tested them, they were indicating on any dog that had any type of disease. So
Oh,
if they had kidney issues, like there was always something wrong with the dog. They wouldn't indicate on healthy dogs, but they were indicating on samples they just generalized to all disease. When we tried to get them to generalize to this like 4 types of cancer, then it completely backfired. They just started hitting on every type of, disease process out there. So yeah, those are lessons learned though. I mean, sometimes you
yeah.
learn more from the mistakes that you make
Yeah.
than the
Interesting.
successes.
Yeah. I mean, this is just very interesting how they process information, right?
It
Not just,
really is.
it's not just about detection, whether or not they detect it, but whether or not the response to it and the behavior attached to it that
Hmm.
you, as like someone who handles and trains, has to know about, right?
Yes.
Um, is there like how aware or like how important or how prevalent is this risk of false positive, especially when it comes to like certain diagnostics that might not be great news for someone?
Right. I think this is why we didn't have a lot of false positives with COVID. I think we learned a lot, from our previous, training, with cancer. So we kind of knew what not to do,
Mm,
and we put out a lot of distractor samples from people with other respiratory illnesses.
mm,
So it goes into the training process, but you always run that risk. And so that's why I say the dogs are a good screening tool. They're not a diagnostic tool. So the way to utilize the dogs is to screen a large number of people and then run a diagnostic test on them. That's why I like looking at things that can be tested rapidly, as opposed to cancer. So that's why COVID is great. Tuberculosis is good. You can test, quickly, for it. So, yeah, I think you need to really just keep in mind the dogs are a screening tool and not a diagnostic tool.
so it's kind of like the in the funnel, it's like the first one of the first steps to really narrow
Mhm.
it down to then have some
Yes.
like diagnostics. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that you find when you talk to people, when you travel, one of the what is one of the that you think biggest misconception about biodetection with dogs? Is there kind of something, a question that you run into all the time and you feel
Yeah.
like, oh, this again. It needs more
Yeah.
education.
Yeah. I think that there is a big misconception about samples. And like so people don't really understand like that the odor kind of consists all around the person's body. So they don't understand how like, okay, they can be trained on breath, but then why can they indicate on individuals? There's a misconception there, about kind of the how odor emits from the human body.
Mm,
So I think that's one of the misconceptions. And I think people don't really pick up on the process of like that you can't just like how dog because they don't understand how dogs associate odors. How if you only use like a handful of samples trying to train a dog for a specific disease, they would just be identifying those people. So that's one of the biggest challenges with using VOCs from people is because you have to have such a large number to be able to teach the dog to pick out that pathogen as opposed to the odor of human odor.
yeah.
So that's I think some of the misconceptions people don't understand, how the dog's olfactory system works and how easily they generalize stuff and how they can memorize stuff. So one of our big challenges and one of the things I'm focusing a lot on is trying to create better training aids for the dogs. So do we really need, VOCs? Everybody's always assumed dogs are smelling VOCs, but nobody's really looked at the non-VOCs. So we're starting to look at that, and everybody's like, "Ah, oh, that's crazy. They can't smell it." But we trained on a tuberculosis antigen that should be non-volatile, but the dogs were able to identify it. So I think it's a matter of threshold. Maybe our machines can't identify that there are volatiles coming off of it, but the dog's nose still can. So I think those are some of the misconceptions that
Yeah.
we just need to do more research and publish more about, what the dog's capabilities are.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I think, obviously, if you have a pet dog that is good at seemingly enjoys, and most dogs do some sort of, enrichment in terms of
Hmm.
detection and sniffing it and right, and then getting as like almost like a hobby into it. And then
Hmm.
you feel like, yeah, you can train your dog, but actually there's so much more that goes into it. And I actually don't know that much about detection. I just never gotten into it, but I feel like I would fall down a rabbit hole and then feel like so overwhelmed with all these things that I would need to know in order to train them properly. But it's
Yeah,
incredibly fascinating because it's kind of like a superpower that they have.
it
We really-
really is.
And it's like right in front of our noses, huh?
It
No pun
is.
intended here, but it's really like that.
Yes.
Um, so I get a lot of question from um trainers or people or young people that are finishing their studies in
Hmm.
canine science or any kind of biological fields, and they ask me, what can I do with that? Right? And for someone who might want to get into biodetection, training dogs, what would you recommend how to get started if someone who's has no connections yet and has
Yeah.
not done any of this kind of work, how do they get
Right.
started?
I think one of the good places would be there are very few private companies that do what I do. People are always welcome to reach out to me. I'm always looking for good
Yeah.
people. But going to the universities that have canine olfaction programs, I think is a really good place to start. I mean, I didn't even realize when I got into it, like all the resources that were out there. So, yeah, I think doing that, and I think attending conferences, going to, like the International Working Dog Conference, or going to, if they can get permission to go to the HITS conference, like going into some of these detection conferences and, listening, and learning, and then they'd like realize, is this something I really want to do? And they'd also make connections with people, in that space.
Yeah. It's always about just starting the conversation and making connections
Yeah,
and
exactly.
getting one fun foot into the door somehow.
Hmm.
Somehow will
Right.
give you a chance at least to learn. Um,
Uh,
is there a field that you for example, I'm someone who studies first
yeah.
and then trains later.
Yeah.
Um, is there a field that you find is the most helpful if someone wanted to get into this, like learn more about biochemistry of odors or the
Right.
neuroscience of learning? Is there something that you think is the most beneficial?
Yeah, I think probably analytical chemistry,
Hmm.
you know. I think that's yeah, I think that's kind of the where a real key focus would be.
Yeah.
You know, virology, we're starting to like I'm getting some virologists working with me now. They're like, "Oh, okay,
Interesting.
wait, what can we do?"
Yeah.
You know. But the analytical chemists are incredibly beneficial. And for somebody to have a background in that and then also learn how to train the dogs to do it would be just a
Yeah.
huge, huge advantage in the
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. Um, I think that's all the questions that I had for us. Maybe one as a finisher, as a wrap up.
Sure.
Um, what is one thing that you would want people to know? I know we talked about misconceptions, but maybe
Okay.
something in general, one thing that you would want anyone to know about biodetection or beagles or the line of work that you're doing, anything random,
Yeah.
that you just want to have everyone to think about, maybe.
Super good. I think I think really thinking about the fact of looking at the dog as, you know, they're like a little computer. You know, their nose can take in odor, and not only can they take in odor, their brain is a computer that can process odor. And that's what makes them just so incredible. And I think if people really looked and understood that, from one, it would just help people with their general pets to not be frustrated with them when they're walking them down the sidewalk and they want to sniff, sniff, sniff everything. That's part of their learning process of their environment. And so I think for people just to really take that into account, like this is how they see the world,
Mhm.
you know, and I think it might make pet easier for pet owners to understand, like, why is my dog doing this? Because he sees the world through odor, you
Yeah.
know, as opposed to through sight. There's a great little clip, a little video, a TED Ed video that I try to get everyone to watch that Alexander Horowitz did on how a dog smells.
Mhm.
And it's really short, it's very to the point, but I think that everybody that owns a dog should watch it. It's
Okay, I
really
will put it in the
beneficial.
show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, very
That's
good.
that's a very nice or very beautiful way of looking at this. I think kind of swapping the frustration that you sometimes get
Mhm.
with a dog who doesn't want to keep moving and just exchange it with some being in awe of like what your dog is able to do in front of you and you kind of
Yes.
witness that and just put yourself in your dog's kind of world for a moment
Yes.
and then just enjoy kind of that they can do
That they
something
could
that you
do that.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. This was so
thank
much fun.
you.
I think I could have talked to you 2 more hours at least, so we might do that at some point.
Yes, I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so much fun. Really, I've enjoying so much talking to you and hearing your stories, and you have a really good way of, of kind of explaining things. And I think your passion comes through how much you love your
Oh,
dogs and how much you love what
thank
you do. And
you.
I'm so glad that I got to meet you and that I get to hear more about your story.